Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this remote meeting of the Development Plan panel. My name is Councillor Neil Walshaw and I'll be chairing today's meeting. Hope you like my festive backdrop. Just like to confirm, as usual, I've got my preamble to go through, the legal niceties to observe. So this meeting of the Development Plan panel meets the requirements of the Council's constitution, even though members of the panel are in remote attendance. While items today will be fully discussed as usual, remote attendance requires a few slight changes to how I manage the debate. I know you've all heard this quite a few times now, but bear with me. Therefore, can all attendees mute their microphones unless I invite them to speak? This will avoid disruption from background noise. Can all participants please keep their cameras on during the meeting? Unless obviously you've got internet instability, and then you can let us know in the chat, that'd be great. All participants will be invited to introduce themselves at the start of the public session to make it clear to public observers who will be involved in proceedings. Members wishing to ask questions or make comments should do so by using the raise hand facility, and I will endeavour to keep my eyes peeled so I can see you all do that. I ask for your assistance and patience while I go through this process. In order to avoid any disruption to the meeting, should I lose internet connectivity, I propose we appoint a deputy chair who could step in during my absence, and I move that Councillor Ritchie be that deputy chair and invite another member to second the motion. So let me bring my screen back. Anyone prepared to second? Councillor Collins, thank you very much. And abstention, silence is agreement, as they say. So brilliant, right. Okay, so I'll now do the introductions for members and officers. So we'll start in usual fashion with Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Next on my list is Councillor Arif, but we've received apologies from Councillor Arif for this morning, unfortunately something's come which she can't attend. Councillor Campbell, has Councillor Campbell joined us or has he given his apologies? I know he's got some issues today. Tash?
I believe he's submitted his apologies, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. And Councillor Carter, we've had apologies from, and Councillor Wadsworth is attending as a substitute. So, Councillor Wadsworth, do you want to introduce yourself at this point?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Paul Wadsworth.
Thank you very much. Councillor Collins.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Dawn Collins, Horsforth Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Finnegan.
Robert Finnegan, Councillor for the Morley North Ward.
Thanks very much. Councillor Gruen.
Councillor Caroline Gruen. Hello, everybody. I represent Bramley and Stanningy.
Thank you very much. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Councillor Jim McKenna, Armley Ward Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Heron.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Lisa Mulherring, Ardsley and Robin Hood Ward.
Thank you. And Councillor Kevin Ritchie, last of the elected members.
Morning, Councillor Kevin Ritchie, Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Right, let's move on to officers now. Let me turn my camera. Who is here? So, Mr. Feeney.
Morning, everybody. David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer for Leeds.
And Adam.
Good morning, everyone. Adam Harvat, Group Leader for Policy and Plans. Could I also introduce Janet Howry, Matthew Brook and Abby Miladinovic will be giving us presentations later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I applaud that time-saving innovation. You're most welcome, officers, today. Thanks very much. And Mr. Elliott.
Martin Elliott, Head of Strategic Planning.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you very much. So let's turn to our regular agenda. Tash, if you want to go through items 1 to 5, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press and public. Item 3, there are no formal late items of business today. Under agenda item number 4, please can I ask members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests? I'll take silence as none. Under agenda item number 5, apologies have been received from Councillor Andrew Carter, Councillor Campbell and Councillor Arif. Councillor Paul Wadsworth is here substituting in place of Councillor Carter. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks, Tash. Right, so let's move swiftly along to, we have no minutes to approve, so let's move on to agenda item 6, which is the Leeds Site Allocation Plan, a consultation on remittal of the 37 policies to the Secretary of State, which is a great mouthful. So I understand it's Janet and Matthew to provide the update, and then we'll do questions and then comments in our usual fashion.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off. Members will recall the previous report to DPP on the 8th of September, which provided a briefing on the relief ordered by the High Court on the 20th of August. This followed the outcome of the judgment on the legal challenge on the 8th of June, which found 3 grounds of errors of law, 2 within the inspector's report relating to specific greenbelt sites and the site selection process, and 1 error of fact relating to the calculated increase in housing supply. Members are reminded that the SAP remittal only relates to the 37 sites on greenbelt land. These are 36 housing allocations and 1 mixed-use allocation for housing and employment uses. A list of the sites are provided at Appendix 1 and a plan showing their location at Appendix 2. The remainder of the SAP remains adopted and is unaffected by the remittal process. The relief handed down by the High Court required the 37 sites to be remitted back to the Secretary of State and the Planning Inspectorate for further examination. Before I continue my presentation, please can I just identify a correction in the title of the DPP report. It should read Leeds Site Allocations Plan Consultation on Remittal of 37 Sites to the Secretary of State. It shouldn't say policies.
Okay.
Yeah. At September's panel, the next steps for the SAP were outlined, namely to update the evidence base supporting the SAP and to identify the proposed approach to the 37 sites affected by the remittal. Since that time, the housing land evidence has been updated. I will hand over now to Matt Brooke to explain the SHLA process and the conclusion from this in relation to the core strategy housing requirements. Matt.
Thank you, Janet. Morning, everybody. Members familiar with the SHLA process will be aware that the update is effectively a stock-taking exercise.
Sorry, it's really quiet. Is it just me struggling to hear? Or...
No, it's very quiet. Matt, could you speak up, please?
Yeah, let me
enunciate.
Let me just check the volume's down. Okay, all right, I'll speak up. Members familiar with the SHLA process will be aware that the update is effectively a stock-taking exercise required by national guidance into the suitability, availability and delivery of sites across the plan period in the short, the medium and the long term. So it's important for plan making, but it's also important for decision taking because it's the source of the 5-year housing land supply. So the 2020 update brings up to date the pipeline of sites with planning permission and allocations, and construction and planning activity is set to a new base date of the 1st of April 2020. Members will be aware that the adopted SAP base date was the 1st of April 2016, so there's a 4-year period in between. So what we're looking at here is what's changed since then, and quite a lot. The picture of land supply has changed dramatically within this period, and that's because of a dual process. The first part of that process is that the amended core strategy 2019 has significantly reduced the target. And as part of that, it's reset the clock on historic backlog. In addition to that, there's been a lowering of the buffer required by the housing delivery test because the council has begun to meet its completions targets in the last 2 to 3 years. So the council is now exceeding its delivery targets, and that's a real shift in performance. So at the same time of this lowering, the council's also seen a significant boost in the supply. And this is predominantly through the amount of planning permissions that have been granted in the last 4 to 5 years, which is greater than at any other period of time. That's been largely supported by an unprecedented uplift in the city centre market, which has seen student accommodations, build to rent schemes, private rental sector, which has exceeded the expectations of the construction industry, developers and the council, even though the council had been optimistic about that market in its original indicative targets. So where that leaves us really is that outstanding stock of planning permissions is a historic level. It's its greatest level since records began in the 1970s. So that's a real shift in the lowering of the requirement and the increase in supply. And those are global figures. So understanding those overall numbers, the SHLA assessment then turns to deliverability and the capability of those sites to deliver and the likelihood of that delivery in accordance with the definitions set in national guidance. And that's where the importance of the SHLA process comes into consultation with the development industry. So in order to provide a clear and accurate picture of this in evidential terms, the council has undertaken 2 consultations at the same time. The first one with landowners, agents and developers, and the second one with the Home Builders Federation and its members. What the council's asked for is for respondents to provide details on the construction programmes so that we can provide an accurate picture of delivery for each of the sites. As part of that, we also invited observations on the impact that COVID-19 might have on the short, medium and long-term picture, understanding that there might be market adjustments born out of the pandemic. So we undertook those consultations in September to October, and we did receive a good response. And what we did was all submissions that we received were just accurately reflected in the SHLA record so that we could provide the SHLA with an accurate update in accordance with all the submissions received. So we've collated all the evidence from the development industry, from landowners, agents and developers, and we're simply reflecting that as part of the SHLA process to provide that up-to-date and accurate picture today. And where that leads us in the final SHLA is that it reveals a 6.8-year housing land supply, which is a healthy land supply position, which is overwhelmingly made up of sites that are already under construction or have a detailed planning permission in place. So there's some security there in terms of its strength of the 5-year housing land supply. And that's the strongest position we've been in for quite a number of years. These in the report in Appendix 4. So moving forward with those global figures, Table 1 in the report shows the current requirement against that supply for the period 2017 to 2028. And that includes completions that have already been delivered between 2017 and 2020, the base date of this new SHLA update. And what that reveals is an overall surplus of some 11,268 units in excess of the SAP requirement to allocate. So in pure numerical terms, that is obviously an extremely strong position, and that's without the need for the remitted sites. So that's a positive picture, and there's the good news. But as we know, that nothing in planning is ever straightforward. So if we move down to the table at para 3.17, and this is where we reveal an issue really in the disconnect between the overall supply and that healthy picture of in global terms to the distribution against indicative targets set out in policy SP7. So we can see there from the table that in the balance column at the end there, 7 of the 11 HMCAs are actually in deficit against their indicative targets up to 2028, with 4 in surplus, and that surplus it comprised largely of the activity that we've spoken about in the city centre in the inner area. You can see there that the city centre has a surplus of it's over 8,500 units, isn't it? So that's the real contribution to the overall figures. So what we can see is a global supply picture that's risen, but some disconnect between the distribution. The council's clear on that picture. So taking all that evidence into account, that leaves us with 3 options that we've identified for the remittal process. And Janet's going to go through in terms of planning judgment, those reasonable alternatives, and lead us into a recommendation. So I'll hand back to Janet at that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, as Matt said, we've looked at 3, well, we considered a number of options for how the SAP should be progressed. And of these, 3 options are considered to be reasonable alternatives, falling within the scope of the remittal, and have been subject to a sustainability appraisal, which is provided at Appendix 5 to the report. 3 options are considered as follows. Option 1, to propose all 37 Greenbelt sites as allocations in the SAP. This option would achieve a distribution of housing sites across the outer housing market characteristic areas and would broadly align with core strategy policy 7. However, the SHLA evidence as described by Matt shows a significant over provision of housing land above the core strategy housing requirements set by SP6 for the SAP plan period to 2028. Given this updated position on housing land supply, it would be very difficult to demonstrate exceptional circumstances for the release of the 37 sites from the Greenbelt. National planning policy sets a high bar for justifying the release of land from the Greenbelt, And given this updated housing position, it would be very challenging to justify the allocation of the sites for the remaining period of the SAP. Option 2, to propose none of the 37 greenbelt sites as allocations. This option of removing the sites as allocations and retaining as land as greenbelt would meet the requirements of policy SP6 due to the existing housing land supply. However, in the context of SP7, it would result in the under-provision of housing supply in some of the outer HMCAs and would affect the ability to address specific housing needs in those areas, including affordable housing. It would also result in the deletion of 5 sites which were proposed to include school provision. However, the need for this school provision arose directly from the provision of the new houses on these sites, and Children's Services have advised that the site's deletion would not result in a school place shortage. This option, however, would avoid the need for land to be removed from the greenbelt and would concentrate development in the existing urban areas in relatively more sustainable locations. The third option, considered to be a reasonable alternative, is to propose some of the greenbelt sites as allocations in order to help address housing shortfalls within the individual HMCAs. These areas of shortfall are, it's 7 of the 9 outer HMCAs. This option, so it's basically all of the outer HMCAs excluding the outer northwest and the outer west areas of a shortfall. However, the capacity of the sites in the SAP would not fully address the distribution of housing land identified by SP7, so that significant shortfalls would still remain, for example, in the outer southeast and the outer northeast areas. It should be noted that SP7 is intended as a guide rather than a rigid target, and as with option 1, demonstrating exceptional circumstances for the release of the greenbelt sites for this option would be difficult to justify given the district-wide housing land supply position. So, informed by the updated evidence, the preferred option for the SAP remittal is option 2, that none of the greenbelt sites, that none of the 37 sites are proposed as allocations and that they would stay as greenbelt land. This is supported by the conclusions of the essay, which found the option to be the most sustainable of the 3 options overall, due to the retention of greenbelt land and the focusing of development towards areas of brownfield land and urban growth. On the basis of the up-to-date evidence provided by the SHLA, the allocation of the 37 sites and thereby the release of the greenbelt cannot be justified for the planned period of the SAP. There is now sufficient non-greenbelt housing land from the remaining housing sites in the SAP and from new permissions without the need for greenbelt release. The need to address SP7 to achieve distribution of housing land in the outer areas would not be justified, as this would require greenbelt land, and in any regard the remittal would not remedy SP7 in full, as a shortfall would remain in some areas. Furthermore, the proposed approach would enable a targeted process to conclude the SAP, to then focus on the update of the local plan and to consider the implications of the planning white paper going forward. Natural England have been consulted on an addendum to the Habitat Regulations Assessment and their response is awaited. The addendum is provided at Appendix 6. No changes are proposed to the assessment, as the proposed deletion of the 37 sites lessens the impact, lessens the likelihood of significant effects on the European nature conservation designations. Subject to Executive Board approval, a public consultation on proposed main modifications to the SAP will commence in the first week of January for 6 weeks. These modifications will propose the deletion of the 37 sites as allocations, meaning that the land will remain as greenbelt, and the modifications are provided at Appendix 7. Following the receipt and processing of the representations received to the consultation, The SAP will be remitted back to the planning inspector for examination. The date of the examination will be advised by the appointed planning inspector in due course. A further point which members are asked to note is that the adopted SAP includes policy HGR1, which requires a review of the need for additional housing allocations and safeguarded land designations post-2023. Following the adoption of the core strategy selective review, the policy states the review will be submitted by the end of December 2021. The SAP remittal evidence shows that there is already sufficient land allocated and safeguarded to comply with the core strategy selective review to 2028. So following the remittal process, the council will be in a position to demonstrate that the intentions of policy HGR1 have already been met. A future review from 2028 can be undertaken once the local plan update is formulated and the outcome of the planning white paper is confirmed. Panel are therefore requested to note the contents of this report and the reasons for the main modifications and recommend to Executive Board that they approve the main modifications for public consultation along with the supporting sustainability appraisal addendum. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you. That was excellent, very comprehensive from the two of you. It's my regular reminder at this point that it wasn't the council that was found at fault during this process. However, we are where we are, and as I've said on this in this panel before, it's my firm opinion that absolutely nothing should stand in the way of the climate emergency focused local plan review. That's the council's #1 strategic priority for the city, and this is the planning systems and services huge contribution to that. So my hat is very firmly in the ring for accepting the recommendations, but I very much do want to open things up for debate. So I've got Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Anderson, and then Councillor Finnegan. Kevin?
Hi, thanks, Chair, and thanks for your report. I just want to, for absolute clarity, can you just address the two sites in 2.1, paragraph 2.11 on page 10? The Horsforth campus, which has a in principle planning application approved, and Scarcroft Lodge, which sounds like that's going to be signed off in December. But I think for members of the public, we need absolute clarity on the position of those two sites, please. Thank you.
No, very good question. If officers could elaborate, please. Team.
Happy to take that one, Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously through the sort of planning decision process, applications can obviously come through at any time. And in the case of the Horsforth campus sites and the Scarcroft Lodge sites, it's obviously recognised that these are greenbelt sites, but that doesn't stop the determination of planning applications, provided that those issues are dealt with through that decision-making process. So in those cases, as I hope is explained, happy to clarify that in the case of certainly the Horsforth campus site, the very special circumstances argument was made with regard to the delivery of 100% affordable housing, and that was felt to be sufficient to demonstrate very special circumstances. Likewise with the Scarcroft Lodge site, there are provisions within the National Planning Policy Framework that allow for the redevelopment of brownfield sites within the Greenbelt, and it was felt as part of that planning approval process that satisfied those requirements in the NPPF. So it was felt that approving those applications was consistent with local and national policy.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really useful clarification. Councillor Anderson, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. In welcoming the decisions that we've got before us today, and we would certainly support what's being proposed, I would point out that I'm glad you finally caught up with the rest of us who've been arguing and pointing this out and being told that we were wrong for years and years. And, you know, it is very sad that a lot of residents in this city have had developments taking place in their area that were not needed were not needed, despite residents pointing out things, despite neighbourhood plan areas pointing this out. It is quite worrying as to what's happened to some of our communities because we have not listened to them. That said, I've got a number of questions that have been posed to me, and I can give clarification of them. I was going to bring the first one up under minutes, but as there was no minutes, I couldn't do it. We're just about to do the consultation. So I asked at the last development plans panel about the SCI. Now, some people have been getting promised that they're going to be able to see a draft copy of the SCI. So where are we with the SCI? And what type of SCI is going to be used for this consultation in January? And will we, as the development plans panel, have a chance to sign that off before it goes out? Then, in respect of the table at paragraph 3.17, there is concern by one of the neighbourhood plan groups that the supply of houses between 2012 and 2017 don't appear to have been taken into account on that table. Would it not make sense to include that in that table to make the position really clear so that people can see where the development has and has not been taken place? The other one is, where we are, yes. What plans have the council got for SP7? Is it still fit for purpose, and should we be looking to get it removed? Because there's a number of areas would argue that they have taken their fair share of development throughout the city. And if you're going to allocate from 2028 onwards on the same basis, you're going to penalise the same areas again. So what plans have you got for trying to equal this out? Because we do need housing, right? To be clear, we do need housing in the city. We do need affordable housing in the city. We need to make sure that we're building the right houses in the right location and the right type in terms of what. And we don't appear to be addressing, maybe this isn't the exact paper to do it in, but I would have liked to have seen as part of the consultation that when you're going out, you're actually explaining to the public the road you're going to be going down in terms of SP7. So on that basis, I will park it just now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. So I guess with Councillor Carter unable to make it today, and I do hope he's okay, you bear the burden for rewriting evidential-led planning history over the last 10 years. Well, good luck with that. Okay, so for the 7,000th time in this plans panel, whether in person or remotely like this, the council's been evidence-led throughout, has followed legal processes throughout, and has not been found at fault throughout. But we are where we are now. There's quite a few questions to unpack there. So, looking to officers, we've got the SCI 2.7 as a table and SP7, future of SP7. So, who wants to respond?
Chair, can I pick up on the SCI points?
Sure, yeah, please.
And then I'll defer to other colleagues. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Anderson. My recollection of the last meeting we had on the 3rd of November was that we would be able to share interim SCI in advance of the local plan updates consultation rather than necessarily the site allocations plan remittal. The issue of timing has obviously raised its head in terms of being able to submit this in advance, well, as soon as reasonably practicable, and that has meant that the timescales probably don't allow for us to be able to take a interim SCI through this panel before going out to consultation, as there are no other panels scheduled, obviously, before we begin that consultation. The interim SCI has been informed by discussions with an engagement group that was set up for what we can call the full SCI revision, which still remains a very clear intention of the council, and the interim SCI, which is proposed to accompany this consultation, and obviously will inform this consultation, is a process that will only cover us during the period of the COVID-19 restrictions. So what we're proposing to do is for that document to be published on the website, but also to show a direction of travel, to consult on the full SCI at the same time, and hopefully use this as an opportunity to gather the views of the public, of their experiences of consultation during lockdown and beyond, and that will help us inform the full SCI, which will, subject to other approvals. I see no reason why it can't be brought to this panel, but I apologise if the timing unfortunately hasn't allowed for the interim SCI, given the need to go out to consultation on the site allocations plan remittal, doesn't really allow us to take that document through this panel.
Thanks, Adam. So the table 3.17.
I'll explain that, Councillor. The reason why the completions between 2012 and 2017 are not on the table is that this table represents the clock restarting in effect at the start of the core strategy as amended from 2017 onwards. Although I do agree actually that that is important context. So what I'd propose is that is included as part of the table in the background paper, because it includes important information. For example, proportionally, Airborough looks to have a deficit of quite a high proportion of its housing requirement in deficit. And the reason for that is because effectively their supply was front loaded in that 2012 to 17 period, where you saw a great number of completions on the one site really at High Roads. I think there was over 370 units there. So it's important to outline those HMCAs that had that front loaded delivery in the pre-2017 period. So I think that I agree with that, and I think we propose to put that in the background paper and include a column in that table.
Okay, thanks, Matt. That's really helpful.
Cheers.
Looking at sort of bigger strategic picture, Councillor Anderson asked about SP7.
Chair, if I could
Please, Martin,
come back in on that one. We can pick up looking at SP7 through a future update to the local plan, and we can assess that distribution policy against the new suite of climate emergency policies that we will have delivered through this initial look at the local plan update. And I think that will be important, because then those climate emergency policies informing a revised approach to distribution can then inform planning for housing and where that goes post 2028.
It's a useful point. There is a lot happening in the planning world, so to speak, and we need to be mindful of that at all times. Yeah, for sure. And the order I saw, I've got Councillor Finnegan, then Councillor Collins, then Councillor McKenna. So Robert, if you're next.
Thanks, Chair. 3 questions. First one is page 66, which is the table 1, 4.1, which refers to HG2 150, which is land east of Cherwell in Morley North. A couple of questions, sub-questions, if you like. One is, this was allocated for a school, but the school isn't needed because the planning department are absolutely clear that a school has been allocated on land further up at Laneside Farm. So there's no issues about new primaries anyway. But this is also the area of land that is adjacent to the new station at the White Rose. And if it's going back into Greenbelt, I want to be reassured by officers that they will make sure that there is no lack of defence. If the developer comes along and says, we've built this station, we need this housing development here at this particular location to pay for the station. I'm assuming that they will fight tooth and nail to retain it as Greenbelt. So I'd want that assurance if I could, Chair. Second question relates to page 134. If you look at the table there, I'm of course interested in the outer southwest, which claims that we're building, and we have built since 2012, more on brownfield than greenfield. And I must admit, I don't recognise these figures at all. Taking it that in Morley we've lost Daisy Hill, greenfield, Lowmore Farm, greenfield, Owlers Farm, greenfield, Pitty Close Farm, greenfield, Scott Lane, all greenfield. I'd like the figures broken down, not only in terms of outer southwest, because I don't believe them, but I'd also want them broken down between brownfield and greenfield for the Morley North and Morley South wards, please, because I don't recognise this view that you're building more houses on brownfield and greenfield, certainly not in our location. And the last one is page 147, Chair, if I could take colleagues along to 147, which is about green space, which confirms that Morley North has some of the poorest green space provision, if not the poorest green space provision in the city. And I'd like to know what the planning department have got proposed to improve that situation, specific plans. So I'd be delighted to hear what they're going to do about it. Thanks, Chair.
Right, so there's quite hyperlocal questions there. Who wants to pick these up? I would suggest, in terms of figures for the brownfield to greenfield comparison, I think, well, they are accurate, but I mean, it's probably something that could be responded to outside of the plans panel, a development plan panel.
I'm not sure they are accurate, but I'm happy to have those figures.
Yeah,
you know,
we can pick them up
with a
outside.
premature once upon a time, perhaps with them. Not a problem.
So,
Yes.
East of
Chair.
Shore green space, yeah.
Oh yes, Chair. I mean, I'm happy to come back in on that, and certainly commit to sending Councillor Finnegan those figures on brownfield, greenfield losses, but also send him further detail on green space provision and the approaches to green space provision. And it's just to remind members as well that, and just so that the audience is clear as well, that this is a very limited process that we're going through here. It's limited to these 37 sites, and it's limited to simply proposing that they no longer come forward for housing and remain in the green belt. So on the point about the Cherwell site next to the railway, Councillor Finnegan, I mean, we don't have a planning application in front of us for that, so it's not for me to comment on any merits of that. As Adam suggested earlier, with regards to the Horsforth campus, national guidance does make it possible and does oblige local authorities to consider proposals that come forward on Greenbelt. So it can't be ruled out, but if that should happen, then the council will have to determine any planning application on its merits. And because there isn't any in front of us at the moment, we don't know what those merits are. So it isn't really appropriate for me to comment on any aspects of that.
Can you just briefly respond, Chair? I don't want to hold up because I know we're busy and all that sort of stuff, but the planners, clearly the same as me, have seen the pre-application proposals that are floating around for housing at this particular point. So I don't think it's entirely accurate to say we're totally unaware and we don't really know what's going on. And I'd be fascinated to see if there have been some discussions with this particular developer about, yeah, we know the station is going to cost you a load of money and you do need this housing development. We'll see what we can do. I'm not at all reassured, but I haven't been reassured for the last 18 years. So I suppose that's nothing new. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, well, it is.
Thank you. I'm happy to come back, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just because I think Councillor Finnegan does raise an important point, and I mean there will be some developers who had schemes in the process where now those pre-application discussions and even applications will be fundamentally affected by this process. And there will be a need for those schemes to be revised should a developer wish to maintain them and put them forward as proposals to the council. But certainly these sites are proposed to go back into the Greenbelt, and actually they are currently Greenbelt because the judge in her order actually put them back into the Greenbelt. So that's a hiatus, if you like, that the council and developers will be working through. But the clarification now that this plan panel is giving an executive board next week will give a very clear signal as to the council's position on what the status of these sites should be.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. That's a really important clarification. I mean, if we need to maintain, and this process does maintain the integrity of the SAP, because the SAP is, for want of a better analogy, one of our primary lines of defense if you're not want to see housing being built, but it's one of our main mechanisms of controlling what, how, why, and when. So, I mean, it is incredibly important we do that. It is the fact that, you know, if it's not in the SAP, then it's, you know, not going to happen unless there are incredibly specific extenuating circumstances. So it's important that we maintain this process, folks. Right, so Councillor Collins, then Councillor McKenna, then Councillor Wadsworth.
Thank you, Chair. I hear what officers say about SP7, that in reality it's a guide, but I still think table 3.17 is quite critical, and I'm just wondering whether there's additional information needs to be made clear within that table. For example, could officers confirm where Windfall sites go with regards to those tabled? Do only Windfall sites go in once a house is completed, or do they go in once the planning permission has been given, or do they not go in at all? In addition, we've already mentioned the Horsforth campus site. Where do the 150 plus houses that we've given permission in principle for go within table 3.17? The reason I'm a bit pedantic about this is we do get developers coming forward saying you're a shortfall in your HMCA, so we're going to help you out. But if it's a clearer picture in that table and shows what's coming forward as well, I think we can defend it better. So that's my question. Where does Windfall go? Where do the 150 plus houses for Horsforth campus go, please?
Yep, thanks, Dawn. Yeah, Adam, do you want to? Whoever's appropriate.
I think
Pat's going to cover this one, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, okay, Windfall. Let's just split it up for the avoidance of doubt in definitional terms. There's small windfall, which is the 500 per annum that is set in policy. And that's by definition windfall. It's unidentified and it's not monitored. Then there's large windfall, which is planning permissions that come forward on sites that are above the site threshold for SHLA. So they would be identified and tracked and monitored as part of a forward planning exercise. Now, those are sites that are monitored by SHLA, but if they're not in SAP, then they're a large windfall site. So anything that's been granted permission since the SAP that is big enough to be included in the SHLA, that's included in the figures there in the table at 3.17. And that's obviously everything that's happened in planning permission terms up until the 1st of April 2020. Anything that happens after the 1st of April 2020 would be included in large windfall, but only if you were providing a further update to the base of the plan. So as it stands at the 1st of April 2020, all those planning permissions that were not previously in SAP, that are big enough to be in the SHLA, are now included in that table. That's how it works.
Can I come back to?
Yeah.
So these 37 sites then that we're leaving in Greenbelt now, are they in the SAP column, the numbers? If you've taken those out, what have you done about the Horsforth College campus site? Have you put that back in the SAP numbers? Because we've effectively said that there's 150 houses there plus.
Okay, well, the 37 remitted sites are not in there because they're not part of the forward supply, apart from the one that has planning permission at Brewery Lane. But with the Horsforth campus site, that would clearly become an identified site that would be tracked and monitored through SHLA upon its permission. But because the base date of this update is the 1st of April, it's not in that table yet, but it would only be included if you were to provide a refresh to that table. So throughout the examination process, when the inspector invites what's changed since this evidence here, then we could provide an update on that, and it'd be clear that that would be part of the forward-looking supply.
So, sorry, Chair, I think this is quite important that we get this right, because what we could end up doing is having several planning applications coming forward, all filling the same small hole. I'd like to know more about what this threshold is as to what is classed as a small site and a big site. And I'd like officers to actually put sites like the Horsforth campus site somewhere in the table, even if it means a separate column. I think it's totally inaccurate to say that the north of Leeds has got a shortfall of -70 when we've given this permission in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and the background paper can deal with that in terms of we'll set we have to set a base date. There always has to be a base date for the calculation of housing land supply, but clearly you can provide the information of what's happened since the base date, and that would include and can include a table of those permissions that have been granted after which the base date was set, and that can include obviously the Horsforth campus to show contextually what those contributions are for each HMCA. I think that's a fair point, and that's something that can be provided as part of the background paper. Yeah. Okay,
that's useful, Matt. Martin, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, Chair. Thank you for that. Just to say, and just to comfort members, that as usual with submission of planning information, there will be a background paper, as Matt's alluded to, which will take a lot of the material that is in front of members today, but make that a bit more public friendly. But it will also take on board some of the questions that have been asked today and some of the clarity that's been asked for, because these questions are questions that are going to be asked by residents and consultees. So we want to make sure that it's all there and it's very clear, because I think members will agree this is complicated. It's been a very complicated process. So we just need to, throughout this consultation, ensure that the consultee responses we're inviting are made in the right context. So doing things like clarifying for Councillor Collins the current status of the Horsforth campus site will be important. It's in the DPP paper, but we need to make it clear in the background paper that it doesn't become part of those numbers because it hasn't got permission yet. But if it does, that will help improve the supply within the North HMCA.
Okay, that's really helpful. Transparency is everything, as always, on this panel. Right, so Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to say in Barry's opening point regarding an oversupply of housing, can I point out that it was the city centre and the inner area where there's an oversupply of 14,333 houses that has got us out of the mire and allowed us to maintain the credibility of the SAF. Again, it's been done by town cramming. The issue that Councillor Finnegan raised regarding green space in Morley, quite right, you should fight for the award. But can I point out that Armley has the lowest amount of green space and poor sports pitches? I always raise this point. I know we can't do anything about it, but we are suffering in the inner area for lack of green space, lack of playing pitches and town cramming. And that is what is getting us out of the mire. And I don't think anybody sat around this table should ignore that fact, because it is a fact. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you. Well said. I mean, the inner areas of Leeds are doing the serious heavy lifting when it comes to housing in this city. So, and people need to bear that in mind. So elected members from outer areas, you know, when you look at colleagues like myself and Councillor McKenna from inner areas, bear that in mind, I think. Councillor Wadsworth, Paul, you're next.
I think we're still on questions, although I think that Councillor McKenna's was a comment, not a question, Chair, but I'll bring us back to questions. I don't mind. I'll bring us back to questions and save my comments for the comment section. My question really is to officers, just as to how open are we by developers bringing a legal challenge for costs of work that they've done on these 37 sites, and now that's all going to be wasted, because Councillor Finnegan makes a very good point about the White Rose rail station. That was very clearly in pre-application discussions that it was predicated on the housing side. When that drops out, obviously the economics of that tends to drop out as well, but a lot of work has been done. Similarly, in my own ward with Wills Gill, a significant work has been done there by developers in bringing that site forward, and that is now also lost. I'm not sure that they'll be quite as happy as we are about option 2 being adopted. And how are we open to challenge, bearing in mind we have clearly made a mistake, and most of the residents of Leeds are owed an apology for this, really.
Well, I think you'll find it wasn't the council that was at fault, but, you know. Council, anyone want to pick up Councillor Wadsworth's points? Officers?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on that point, Chair. Just to say that the plan was clearly challenged within the 6-week statutory challenge period after it was adopted in July 2019. So since that date, developers have known that there was a risk to the sites in the Greenbelt. Now, whilst it was originally thought and considered that that risk would be limited to Aireborough, clearly the judgment and the judge's relief extended that to all of the Greenbelt sites within the plan. But developers from a very early stage, post adoption, did have a chance to engage with that challenge process and did have a chance to make comments to the court in terms of disagreeing with that. And no such challenges were received.
Yeah, important point to note. Councillor Gruen.
Sorry, Chair, just difficulty finding my mute button. I just want to re-emphasise what Councillor McKenna and others have said around the city centre cramming and the overdevelopment of the centre of the city centre areas. It's absolutely right what you say, Jim, and I just wanted to say that I did agree with that. But my question is about, if we take all these Greenbelt sites out and therefore leave the brownfield available for building on. I have noted the paragraph on which analyses contamination, but frequently we find on brownfield sites, as we have in Armley twice actually, Councillor McKenna, that there are complications either because of contamination or other reasons to do with previous use, difficulties developing, etc., which puts the development price up and often results in developments not bringing any affordable housing or well below the quota forward, and similarly reduced green space and any other advantages that we might be looking for in terms of planning gain. So how confident are we that, that the brownfield available for us is going to be developable in all instances? And what will be the impact if we find that there are complications on some of these sites?
Right. So who wants to pick up Councillor Gruen's points?
Happy to comment on that one, Chair. I think it's obviously a very reasonable point, Councillor Gruen, thank you. I think one of the things that we have to be mindful of now, I suppose, is that the sites that are in the site allocations plan as adopted have already been through a process and been found sound, and been found to meet all those tests of suitable sites. Likewise, we have a lot more Windfall sites, as Matt went through, that have been through a process in terms of detailed planning consent, which makes up the vast bulk of our land supply. Nevertheless, as you rightly say, there will always be instances of sites coming forward that don't necessarily deliver as planned due to abnormals that perhaps couldn't have been predicted. I think what can give us some comfort, as Matthew's gone through, is the size of the headroom, as we call it, in terms of the 11,000 houses, can give us some comfort that there is a lot of viable supply there. And clearly, through individual plan applications, we'll need to work with developers to try and maximise schemes that deliver to policies, that deliver affordable housing and green space as they're required to do. But where they can't do that, they realistically and accurately reflect that through viability assessments, which will obviously be subject to very robust process. So whilst we can't guarantee that won't continue to happen on individual cases, I think as a global supply across the district, we can have some confidence that we have a lot of supply there, and that developers have made clear through the SHLAP consultation that they feel that these sites are deliverable. So we would very much hope that they wouldn't come back in the next few years and tell us that the sites they'd already told us were deliverable are no longer deliverable.
Well, thank you for your answer, Adam, which was very professional, but I'm absolutely not convinced, because we are regularly told on Plans Panel that sites are not as deliverable as they were first conceived to be, and the results are as I've described. So I think it's a real danger.
I mean, on that, I mean, yeah, there is the never-ending sort of dance between the council as the planning authority and developers trying to minimise their commitments to us as a city and to our communities, and that, I think, is the show that never ends. Unfortunately, Councillor Gruen, and it's up to us. It's beholden on us to have a strong set of policies, which I think we do, to have and to adhere to them, and to be really, really very strict in terms of holding developers to that, particularly green space and affordable housing, which I know is a huge concern for members on this panel, and to also to really drill down into the details of viability assessments, because often that's where developers can behave with the most questionable practices, I think. And there's a memorable city plans one that Councillor McKenna will be probably able to recall, where the developer claimed that providing white goods in the development should be counted as towards their viability. And also the roof, it was a special roof. It was a very, very, very special roof, and that should be considered into the viability. And as you might imagine, Councillor McKenna, as chair of that panel, gave it very short shrift. So it's up to us. We've got to be on our mettle, and that applies to both officers and members. We spent an hour on this, folks. I want to move to look at the recommendations, and then after that, I'm going to have a short comfort break. I know I normally don't do in a 2-hour panel, but if you note the size of my coffee mug, it was extremely unwise this morning. So, but boy, did I need the caffeine. So let's get this item out of the way, and then we'll have a short break for 5 minutes, and then we come back and go through the rest of our items, which are extremely important. So we have some recommendations in front of them. Obviously, we want to give our best advice to executive board. I think the officer recommendations are good and clear and are extremely sensible. And I refer members to my comments at the start of this item, that this is the planning system can take time. The statutory instruments we have to use can be laborious at times. And I think we have an overwhelming strategic priority to get the local plan review done, which focuses on climate emergency, which is a subject which is very close to my heart and other members on this panel. I really wouldn't want this process to detract from that. That is our major strategic priority. So I would urge that panel members go along with the recommendations as set out, but I'm opening that up to discussion now. Don't all stampede. Judging from sort of an array of smiles and nods, I think, are we happy with the recommendations? Yeah? Seeing thumbs up. When we get back to meeting in person, Councillor Collins, are you going to continue doing thumbs ups? I'm just curious. Yeah, exactly, excellent. And then when we're back in person, are we all going to wave at the end of the panel to each other? I think thumbs up again. Excellent. Okay, so it is the opinion of this panel that we support the recommendations as set out. Yeah? Fantastic. Right, no dissent. That's what I like to see. Nice cross-party consensus. Good. On that basis, we're having a short break of 5 minutes till about 7 minutes past 11, so that we can all make various accommodations for our comfort. Thanks very much, folks. What's this? Come on. What's this? What's this? See, the thing is, Abby, right? At all times, the husky, you go to the husky doesn't come to you. Come on. What's this? Come on.
Who can resist a gravy bone?
I know. Oh, she's hot for gravy bones, bless her. This is Sky, my husky. Goodness. Oh, God. There are advantages to doing these things from home. Isn't there? Right. So, are we all back? Hang on.
Can I just confirm with members that they can see the slides I've just put up?
We can say HMO, PBSA, etc., etc.
Thank you.
Now, is everyone, all elected members back? I think we are. Good, let's crack on then. Adam, who's...
Apologies, yeah. Abby's going to give this presentation. So, Abby, when you are ready to go to the next slide, just let me know and I'll click you forward.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Adam. You can put it up now if you'd like.
Can you not see it?
Just the second one is fine.
Oh, I see.
Okay, thanks. So the report in front of the panel today introduces a new supplementary planning document which seeks to establish space, light and ventilation, or amenity, if you use a catch-all term, standards for proposals for houses in multiple occupation or HMOs, purpose-built student accommodation or PBSA, and co-living developments. The preparation of the SPD is in fulfilment of the commitment that we've made in the core strategy within policy H9, which states that these types of development are not subject to the space standards as set out in the policy, but that further guidance will be provided through a supplementary planning document. So a draft SPD has therefore been prepared and the approach to the SPD is set out in the report. I'll take that as read, however, I will just provide a summary of the main issues within the report and the SPD, and then I'm happy to take comments and questions from members. So the nationally described space standards have been introducing a minimum set of space standards for all new C3 dwellings, and these standards have been adopted exactly within the Leeds core strategy as the minimum space standards for all new homes in Leeds. However, the space standards do not apply to HMOs or PBSAs, as these are not considered as dwelling houses in terms of the use classes order. Co-living developments are a relatively new form of accommodation and again are not subject to the requirements of policy H9. However, there is a growing concern in Leeds and elsewhere about the standard of living for residents in poor quality housing, in particular with regard to the impact that this has on health and well-being. And the council recognises the importance of having access to a good standard of amenity within the home and space standards. So in line with council objectives, it's prudent to provide planning guidance for types of accommodation not covered by the policy to ensure that all residents in these types of accommodation can expect a good standard of living. This issue has become even more prevalent in light of the COVID-19 crisis and the resultant lockdowns, because the way that we use our homes has changed significantly and it's intensified. The preparation of the SPD has involved a lot of cross-council working with a number of services within the council, particularly development management and the private sector housing team. And an informal engagement has already taken place with landlords, the universities and developers in preparing the SPD. So it's not the role of the SPD to set out all of the policy requirements for these types of accommodation, for example, green space or parking, as this is established elsewhere within the development plan or in other planning guidance. So the SPD makes reference to other plans, policies and planning guidance as appropriate. The SPD also doesn't determine the amount of these different types of accommodation or what's required, as concentrations and appropriate locations are set out within the core strategy. So for PBSA or purpose-built student accommodation, the SPD recognises that students should have a good standard of amenity throughout their time at university within their student accommodation. which should provide them with this place for study, rest, relaxation, safety, privacy and socialising. The design of PBSA should include appropriate spaces and layouts that minimise the risk to health and safety in order to support a good standard of living. The SPD standards seek to recognise the different ways in which students live whilst at university, particularly with regard to the time spent socialising in communal spaces and the intensity of use within a student bed space. For example, students tend to use bed spaces for study, socialising, relaxation, etc. There are generally two types of student accommodation: that provided within a cluster flat arrangement, which is typically 4 to 6 bed spaces with a shared kitchen and living room. And then there's also student studio accommodation as well. So the SPD seeks to set standards for both of these types of accommodation, requires that all students living within a PBSA development should have access to a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living, dining and communal spaces. The SPD then goes on to set space requirements for the different facilities available within the development. Analysis of PBSA development since 2001 has informed the development of the standards, as has an understanding of the significant effort that's been made by the plans panels in particular to secure high quality PBSA development, and that's been informed through a programme of peer learning and site visits. So the SPD adopts a range-based approach which allows for flexibility and gives weight to the overall quality of the PBSA scheme as a whole. Therefore, it's expected that in most circumstances, developments will achieve the mid to upper sizes of the ranges set out within the SPD, and exceptions to this would only be where the communal space and amenities provided within the development are of a demonstrably high quality and higher standard, which could help to justify a smaller bed space. Consideration will also be given to the overall quality, layout and finish of the bedrooms. The approach to light standards is proportionate and will be determined on a case-by-case basis depending on light availability and the siting of the development, having regard to any adjacent tall buildings, obstructions to light, things like that. And all habitable rooms within the development should have access to natural daylight and provide a good level of outlook, including kitchens, living rooms, dining rooms and bed spaces. And the level of light within the scheme needs to be considered alongside other factors that also contribute to the overall quality of the scheme. If it's considered that light levels within the scheme would be particularly low, further assessment will be required. And then the SPD goes on to rely on building regulation standards for ventilation, seeks to ensure a site-by-site based approach, with advice being sought from environmental health, environmental studies and air quality management colleagues as appropriate, as they would do when responding to a planning application for these types of accommodation anyway. The SPD also captures outlook, privacy and outdoor space in amenity terms so as to provide a well-rounded and holistic approach to securing a really high quality scheme. And then for HMOs, or housing multiple occupation, these are also not subject to space standards or the requirements of policy H9, as they fall within the C4 or sui generis use class. However, there is an increasing awareness that some landlords are letting very small and inadequate rooms in HMOs in parts of the city. And the preparation of the SPD is an opportunity for a coordinated and cross-council approach between the private sector housing team and the planning service to be joined up and complementary to work together to improve the standard of living for potentially vulnerable residents in HMOs. So while the standards established through the SPD will only apply to new planning applications or conversions, so planning applications for conversions to existing HMOs, the private sector housing team are also preparing some separate crowding and space guidance, which will help us to provide a joined up and complementary approach. The SPD standards have been developed using industry best practice, such as the Metric Handbook, which is a planning and design data manual, and then also the National Housing Federation Housing Standards Handbook. The standards adopt a living function-based approach where the space needed for individual elements of living are set out in a matrix. The space required varies depending on which element of the HMO is being shared and the number of bed spaces in the HMO overall. And we've also provided indicative illustrative layouts for the various living functions set out in the SPD as part of an appendix to the SPD. The SPD doesn't determine which element of the HMO should be shared. However, it does set bedsit or bed-sitting room sizes, which depending on which element is shared. So in bed-sitting type rooms, so some living functions are expected to take place within the bed-sit room, and therefore the SPD provides standards based on the activities taking place within the room. And this is really just to ensure that people have got appropriate space to conduct, the normal functions of living as would be expected within any type of accommodation. And then again, so in terms of light standards, the approach is going to be proportionate and based on a case-by-case assessment of availability of light and outlook within the HMO, and all habitable outdoor rooms are expected to have a good access to a good level of natural daylight and outlook. This is particularly important for change of use applications, as they will need to ensure that bedrooms have a good level of outlook, particularly when rooms are converted and they were not usually previously used as bedrooms. Bed sitting rooms should not be formed where they would suffer from such overlooking from other bedrooms or properties that privacy would be impaired, nor would they would impair the privacy of other bedrooms, bedsits, or principal rooms of other properties. In addition, it's particularly important when considering converting rooms to bedrooms at ground floor and basement levels that consideration is given to how rooms will relate to any outdoor or amenity space provided. And the SPD expects that situations should be avoided where occupants are needing to keep their curtains closed or their blinds closed to maintain their own privacy, as this impacts on sunlight and daylight penetration, but also in terms of overall well-being. Again, the SPD captures outlook, privacy and outdoor space in amenity terms so as to provide a well-rounded approach. And again, ventilation standards are derived from building regulations requirements. And then finally, for co-living developments, co-living is a relatively new form of housing model, and it offers individuals the opportunity to live together communally within shared accommodation, which contains communal areas such as lounges, kitchens and workspaces. This type of accommodation is seen as providing an alternative to traditional flat or house shares, and can include additional services and facilities such as room cleaning, on-site gyms and concierge services. It's very difficult to define co-living in planning terms, and therefore the SPD identifies a number of key criteria that will be used to help determine whether a scheme is in fact co-living, such as communal spaces, social meeting spaces, entrance lobbies, management regimes, workspaces, recreational space and things like that. So similar to PBSA, the SPD takes a range-based approach with a minimum studio size of 22 to 30 square metres. Again, to be at the lower end of the range, it is expected that the shared communal spaces should be significantly exceed the minimum requirement of communal space and be of such a high quality, for example, providing high quality communal workspaces and recreation spaces, etc., to justify a smaller bed space. The SPD expects that co-living developments will provide garden space, stroke outside space, for example, roof terraces for use by residents within the scheme. And key to the success of co-living developments will be the effective management of those schemes, and therefore proposals are required to be supported by a management plan, which sets out how the scheme will be managed, how access will be controlled, and how it will operate in such a way that actually supports co-living or communal living and social interaction. We're very keen that this is not seen as a workaround for meeting the requirements of policy H9. Again, light standards will be proportionate and determined on a case-by-case basis depending on light availability in the surrounding development, having regard to sort of tall buildings adjacent to the development site, and ventilation standards will be in accordance with the building regs. And finally, the SPD requires that co-living schemes should provide a good level of outlook and not adversely affect the outlook or the privacy of neighbouring properties. In terms of next steps, subject to members' comments today and DPP endorsement, hopefully, it's intended that the SPD will be subject to formal consultation early in the new year for a minimum of 6 weeks. The comments that we get to that in response to that consultation will be taken into account as appropriate, and a revised draft prepared for pre-adoption publicity, which will then be brought back to DPP for further comments. And following that pre-adoption publicity, the SPD can be adopted by the Chief Planning Officer through delegated powers in line with the Council scheme of delegation, hopefully by the summer of next year. Once adopted, the SPD will become part of the Leeds Development Plan and will carry weight when the Council makes decisions on applications. And then just for members' information, a draft consultation strategy for the upcoming consultation is attached to my report, Appendix 2, which sets out some of our thinking on appropriate ways to engage on the SPD early in the new year, and I'm happy to take thoughts on that. So in conclusion, the preparation of the HMO, PBSA and co-living amenity standards SPD presents a significant opportunity to improve the standard of living for residents in Leeds, regardless of their accommodation type or tenure, and will help to improve the overall quality of accommodation within the city, making a contribution to the city's inclusive growth and health and wellbeing agendas. And Development Plan Panel is therefore invited to comment on the SPD and the plans for our formal consultation in the new year, and endorse the SPD for public consultation. So on that, I'm happy to take comments, thoughts and questions. Thanks, Chair.
No, thanks, Abby. It's a really strong piece of work. So we have to comment on the contents and then the consultation process, make some recommendations on that. Otherwise, we can accept the report and move forward. So up to the floor, as it were. Members, very happy with it. Councillor Collins, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Mulheron.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Abby. That was very useful. And I welcome the report and I welcome the proposal. Couple of questions. So if we get a building, if this goes through and we have this standard, this policy standard, and there's a permitted development, will that developer have to comply with our space standards and light standards, etc.? Or will they still just be able to build whatever they want within a building that they already own and already exists? And then the second point is, we do actually have a university in Horsforth, so we have had HMOs coming forward before now. And the biggest concern residents have are parking and where are the bins going to go? So you briefly mentioned that there's another strategy for parking, but does that specifically reference these three types of accommodation? How clear is it what the parking standards need to be with these types of accommodation? And I'm just wondering whether there could be some link or additional information in this document that clarifies that for anyone reading the policy.
Thanks, Councillor Corrin. So on your first point on permitted development, if it comes in as a prior approval for permitted development and it's deemed to be permitted development, then that's it. So the SPD can't affect those proposals, unfortunately. However, the government has just introduced the requirement for permitted development schemes to include natural light. And then as of April, the 6th of April next year, they've also introduced a requirement for all permitted development schemes to accord with the nationally described space standards. So that'll be policy H9, although it won't be in reference to H9, it'll be in reference to the nationally described space standards, which is effectively the same thing. So that's a really welcome move, I think, in terms of driving up standards. And then on your second point about parking, I know that this is particularly an issue, but there's what we have a parking SPD, which sets out the parking requirements for HMOs. So that is cross-referenced slightly within the SPD, but I'm happy to make that reference clearer. But we're also going through a process of introducing a new transport SPD, and the transport SPD seeks to capture 4 existing SPDs relating to transport and put them all together in one place. That's been out to public consultation once already. I'm not quite sure where it's up to at the moment in terms of going out for the pre-adoption publicity, but I can totally appreciate the need to clarify the requirements for parking within the SPD, and I'll try and do that before we go out to consultation on this draft.
Can I just come back briefly? Thank you, Abby. That's very useful. Just regarding the existing document we've got, then it references houses of multiple occupancy, but you say this third type of housing now is new. Does our parking standards document refer to that type of housing as well? And if not, could you just see whether that could be reviewed?
I'm going to be honest and say I'm not clear on whether it does reference co-living, but I'll definitely follow that up and check with Highways and clarify and come back to you if that's okay.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. That'd be really useful, Abby. Thanks very much. Councillor Anderson.
Just briefly and hopefully quickly, I totally welcome this paper. It's an excellent paper and certainly one that can be supported. But just for the point of clarification, should we be putting or can we be putting anything in here to look at our climate standards that we're trying to get in terms of energy efficiency of housing, in terms of minimums? Is there anything that we can put in here to beef up some of the other SPDs that are going to be coming forward, as the chair commented on at the beginning? Is there anything that we can do to match them up so that we can, all the pieces of the jigsaw can come together, and that there is no part of the jigsaw that doesn't fit together, so that we don't get people trying to find a crack and using that as a way through Second point is in terms of the timescales, which are fine, but can you briefly outline as to what weight, as those of us who are on plans panels, when we'll be able to start giving this more weight? Full weight will obviously come when it's totally adopted, but can we make reference to it once you've been out to consultation, got acceptance on some of the points? Is there anything that we can do to start using this more clearly at plans panels? Thank you.
Thanks, Anderson. Councillor Anderson. Abby, do you want to come back on those?
Happy to come back, or Martin might want to come back as well. On the requirements for energy efficiency and things like that, that'll be captured as part of the local plan update. So obviously the SPD only relates to sort of amenity standards within the proposals for HMOs, PBSAs and co-living. The requirements for energy efficiency measures and things like that can be cross-referenced within the SPD as other development plan policies are, but that will be captured as part of the local plan update, which obviously is a priority for the service at the moment. And then Adam, did you want to come in?
Oh, sorry, my point was what you've just covered, but better than I ever could, Abby, so don't worry about that. I think I don't know, Nicole, if you wanted to come in on the weight to be given to the document at the various stages.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just for the audience, Nicole Walker, legal advisor to the panel. With regard to weight, as the document progresses through the different consultation procedures and we get more of an idea of what the end product is going to be, then definitely more weight can be applied by decision makers, officers and members when they're considering planning applications, so that it is emergent policy, but closer to the adoption stage, then that gathers the amount of weight that can be applied to the SPD.
Okay, does that clarify that? And Nicole, apologies, I forgot to introduce you at the start of the meeting. That's really, really remiss of me.
That's no problem at all.
Anyway, right. So, Councillor Mulheron and then Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Anderson actually put me to the post in terms of how this will fit with our climate emergency policies. I welcome the proposals in terms of raising standards for some of the most vulnerable residents in the city. Obviously, young people across our student population, but also many other vulnerable adults who, for one reason or other, are not able to access larger accommodation of their own. So really, really welcome the fact that we're trying to raise the standards across the board, because I think some of the things I've seen across the years in terms of the private rented sector in particular, and the living standards that people have been expected to have a decent life in, frankly, very, very below standard. And if we're going to have the uplift in health outcomes for the city that we need to see in line with our health and wellbeing strategy, ensuring that the poorest can improve their health the fastest, we absolutely need to be raising the standards of this accommodation that's affordable and ensures that people can live a healthy life with decent spatial standards, air that they can breathe, there's good quality, and decent light and outside space as well. So really welcome the uplift that this will bring to that part of the housing sector in the city.
Thanks for that. Yeah, me too. I bet all of us have got some examples in our council life as a really, really, really poor standard in HMO quality. You might imagine being Headingley and Hyde Park Council. I've got quite the case file on low quality HMOs. Councillor McKenna, and then I think we can wrap this item up. Oh, Councillor Gruen next after Jim.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I understood co-living, but when I read the document, it particularly talks about Lilac scheme, which is in my street where I live, a scheme that I have been in many, many times. I've been invited in less worrying times in for Thursday meals several times, and I don't really see that as a co-living scheme. That's what I'm trying to get my head around. It's more like a cooperative that They have plenty of public open space because it's an old school, and Army councillors fully supported it, and there was quite a bit of transfer of assets from the council to this scheme. It's a very environmental scheme, but to me, co-living was what I thought they understood as co-living was professional people living together, you know, which happens on an informal basis. So, you know, I'm puzzled on that one. So maybe if you could give me some explanation. Regarding HMOs, which is the bane of all our lives, it's been well documented by Dawn and Barry. I know it's about amenity standards. I fully appreciate that. But parking is a big issue for us, particularly in the inner area. Like Headingley and Bramley, we have lots of big houses, and we've been coming in where this in particular was a small house, and they wanted 11 sort of crash pads put in, and it was only the local councillors who actually come in and stopped it. But my concern is that there's reference about proliferation, that we can't do much about it, as I understand it. Now, a street, and possibly my street, has been taken over a little bit because they are very large houses, 5 bedrooms, built by the co-op in 1901, marvellous houses, but lends themselves to HMOs, which brings all sorts of problems in. We have a proliferation policy for takeaways. Why don't we have one for HMOs, where we don't want to see them all clumped together? You know, it can ruin our communities in the inner area. It can ruin our streets, and perhaps some more thought should go into that. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you. So, Abby, do you want to pick up on that? It's about proliferation and density of HMOs in the main.
Yeah, so on Councillor McKenna's first point about co-living, is absolutely right in terms of we're not considering the Lilac scheme to be a co-living development, as those are more cooperative forms of ownership, and they'll actually also be within a C3U, so it's likely, or they're likely to be in a C3U, so they'll be subject, schemes like that would be subject to the space standards requirements set out by policy H9. What we mean by co-living is these purpose-built co-living schemes that you're seeing quite an uptake of in major cities. So there's quite a lot in London, there's also quite a lot in Manchester as well. It could be that it's only a matter of time before we start to get more interest in those types of schemes in Leeds in the future. We obviously don't know that, but so what we're targeting here is the purpose-built co-living developments, and the intention is with these schemes that they provide a sort of intermediate or affordable way of sharing, and it's they're aimed at young professionals or recent graduates effectively, and it's a way of living more affordably in city centres. So that's what we're targeting with this element of the SPD. We're not talking about sort of cooperative or co-housing schemes like the Lilac scheme or the Chapeltown co-housing scheme either, because they're both in a C3 use. And then on the concentration or proliferate, can't get the word out, but you know what I mean, I'll give it, of HMOs, that's covered within policy H6 of the core strategy and with the Article 4 direction that we've got in place within the city. That's been a piece of work done recently by some University of Leeds students that has looked at the evidence base on HMOs and done some work on exploring what the issues are in terms of HMOs in Leeds, and that's something that we're happy to summarise and bring back to a future panel meeting as appropriate. But there is an extra piece of work to be done there on summarising the work that's been done by the students and looking at those issues in more detail. But we're happy to bring that back to a future panel as appropriate when we've got the time to do so, because obviously the local plan update is obviously the priority for us at the moment. But yeah, I'm happy to bring that back.
That would be really helpful, Abby. Thanks. Is that answer your
Chair,
question?
Chair, can I just a little follow-up? Thanks for that, Abby. That was most helpful, but I'm now convinced I don't understand what co-living is. I don't know any examples of Leeds, so perhaps a bit more information on that might be useful, and maybe we could have input more into the SPD as it goes out for consultation. I haven't got a clue, because I don't think we've ever had one unless it's operating in some type of informal basis.
So Abby, I was just going to say, how about you circulate to members of DPP some case study examples via email? and which members can then look at, and then because I want to make progress this morning. But Jim's right to raise it, but let's have some examples circulated electronically.
That's quite right. That's what I was going to say. Thanks, Chair.
Excellent. Caroline Gruen, Councillor.
Very briefly, I just want to say I really welcome the report, as I welcome anything that drives standards up, and I can't wait for it to become a fully approved policy. Long time coming, but it's a very positive piece of development. Just one really very specific question. We have visited on a number of occasions good examples of purpose-built student accommodation, and just one very detailed point. The only downfall that I have felt with the ones that I have visited is that all the shared areas are absolutely fabulous, and the whole quality and standard of the interiors is brilliant. But in terms of the individual bedroom sizes, I actually think they just fall short in many of our new developments. And I would like you to give some thought to that in these standards. Most typically, it will have a desk chair arrangement of some kind, and a bed and a wardrobe, and then of course the bathroom off. What it doesn't accommodate is, if you really do want to relax just on your own, sitting in an easier position and perhaps watching a television program or just unwinding generally, it doesn't have that facility. It assumes that all the students' socialisation space is going to be in the communal areas with other people. And sometimes you do actually just need a bit of downtime on your own. And I don't think the bedroom sizes accommodate that in many instances. I'm sorry, that's me. So the question is, could some thought be given to that, please?
Thanks, Councillor. We have tried to do that to a certain extent already in terms of the standards that we've set out. And what we've tried to do in setting those standards is look at what the schemes have been like in Leeds so far, and also to recognise the work that's been done by yourselves through panel chairs to benchmark the size and space standards that we've got within the rooms. So we've tried to capture that already. I think as part of the consultation process, we'll get an understanding of what that seems to be like for others as well. But it's something that we definitely need to consider, and have tried to consider already within the standards that we've set out as the draft SPD.
Oh, it's done it again. Can I apologise for my phone keeping on doing that? I thought I turned it off. My apologies. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Abby. And Councillor Gruen wins the award for clearly the worst ringtone in the developed world. I just want to raise, Councillor Campbell, who couldn't make it, has raised a couple of points for your email that have been circulated to members, so and to officers. So I just want to, obviously we all know this is a subject close to Colin's heart. So he's raised issues about light and space, ventilation, that kind of thing, public spaces, communal areas, that kind of thing. So we're not going to really all go through it in detail, but yeah. Councillor Campbell has made a contribution that has been noted by officers. Is everyone content with this item then? Seems to be, yeah. See quite a few nods. Excellent. Okay, and the thumbs up from Councillor. Much appreciated. No, I think it's a good piece of work. I think we've made some contributions to it, but keen to see it go out for public consultation. In that case, we're happy to go with the recommendations. Yep. Silence is agreement. That's what I like to hear. Excellent. Okay, so our last item is accessibility SPD. So Adam's kicking over the screen sharing. Thank you very much. So Abby, fire away. I think this is you again.
It's me again, Chair. Yeah, thank you. So I'm trying to be very mindful of time constraints, and so I'm happy to take further comments from members via email afterwards if that's helpful or necessary. I'm just going to give you a very skip through what this consultation's about and what we've done in response. So in July 2019, the government announced its intention to consult on options to raise accessibility standards in new homes. And in September 2020, they published a consultation paper which considers how to raise accessibility standards. And that paper seeks to recognise the importance of suitable homes for older and disabled people. This is already an important issue, as we're aware of in Leeds, and we're also aware of the growing need for accessible and adaptable accommodation in light of our ageing population. Just to point out that the consultation period closed on the 1st of December, and unfortunately due to timings, and development plan panel's work programme, which is rightly focused on the SAP and the local plan update, it's not been possible for us to bring a draft response in front of the development plan panel for consideration before the consultation period is closed. So what we've done is sent an interim draft response to government for this consultation, caveated that it will be confirmed following today's discussion pending comments from panel members. To kick off on accessibility then, members will be aware that there are currently 3 standards of accessibility set out within the building regulations. First is category 1, so that's the M41 standard. It's the minimum standard that should apply to all new homes. This sets out guidance on minimum standards of accessibility and is applicable to all newly erected dwellings. Guidance is provided on level access, level thresholds, doors and corridor widths, entrance level WCs and accessible heights controls. And then the next 2 categories are optional in building regulations terms, and then they require a planning policy in order to switch on the requirements for developments to meet the new standards in accordance with locally identified needs. So category 2 is accessible and adaptable, and that sets a higher standard for accessible homes, which is broadly equivalent to the lifetime home standard, providing enhanced accessibility, circulation spaces and bathrooms to make new homes more accessible. It also includes features to make the homes easily adaptable over time to a wide range of occupants, including older people and those with reduced mobility and some wheelchair users. And then category 3 or M43 wheelchair user dwellings. This sets a standard for wheelchair accessible homes. This requirement can either be for a wheelchair adaptable home, which includes features to make the home easy to convert to be fully wheelchair accessible in the future, or a wheelchair accessible home as built, which includes the most common features required by wheelchair users. It also includes use of outdoor space, parking and communal facilities that may be provided for the use of occupants. So Leeds Core Strategy Policy H10 requires that new build housing developments provide 30% of dwellings to meet M42 standards and 2% of dwellings to meet M43 standards. The rest of the dwellings should be built to M41 standard as minimum. This is not an easy thing to achieve in planning policy, which perhaps explains why there's not been many local authorities that have sought to introduce these standards within their local plans. And Leeds is very much seen as leading the way as a best practice local authority in accessibility terms. We spent a significant amount of time and effort in securing these requirements within the development plan. And at the time of preparing the core strategy selective review, which introduced the policy, the percentage requirements for M42 and M43 were based on what could be accommodated within the viability assessment for the plan without undermining our other infrastructure requirements such as affordable housing and green space. It was always the intention that should the viability situation improve in Leeds, an increase in the percentage requirements would be progressed through a future local plan update. So onto the government's consultation paper, it sets out 5 broad options which they considered to be ways in which they can boost the amount of accessible housing, and provides an opportunity through the consultation for Leeds to provide feedback to government on our experiences of securing and implementing the policy, in the hope that it provides a useful steer to government when setting future policy direction. So there are 5 policy options, and there's 3 of those are on the screen now, and then there's the remaining 2 on the next slide. So the first one is to consider how recent revised planning policy on the use of optional technical standards impacts on the delivery of accessible housing. Option 2 is to mandate the current M42 requirement in building regs as the new minimum standard for all homes, with M41 applying by exception only, where M42 is not practical and not achievable. M43 would apply where there is a local planning policy in place, which is evidenced through local needs. Option 3 is remove M41 altogether, so that all new homes will have to at least have the accessible and adaptable features of an M42 home. M43 would be where a local planning policy in place, where a need has been identified and evidence. This would mean that no new homes could be built as M41. And then next slide, please, Adam. Thank you. Option 4 is to mandate the current M42 requirement in the building regs as a minimum standard for all new homes, with M41 applying by exception only. So a set percentage of M43 homes would also need to be applied in all areas. So rather than local authorities setting a planning policy for the provision of M43, a defined and constant percentage would apply to all new housing. And then finally, option 5 is to change the content of the mandatory technical standard. This could be done by upgrading the statutory guidance to create a revised M41 standard. This revised standard could be pitched between existing requirements of M41 and M42, adding more accessible features into the minimum standard. The full commentary on the relative costs and benefits of the proposed policy options is set out within the report, as well as some of the key considerations for government in terms of the practicality of implementing some of the policy options as set out, particularly in terms of ensuring that the exceptions to meeting the standards are very, very tightly described by government in any future review of the building regs. So following consultation with the Leeds Older People's Forum, the Leeds Access and Usability Group, and discussion with plans panel chairs, the interim draft response sets out that the council's preferred option is policy option 4. And the main reason for this is that it will significantly boost the supply of accessible housing, not only in Leeds, but nationally as well. This will give certainty to applicants and developers about the expectations in terms of accessible housing provision, but it will also give clarity to Leeds residents about the future development and meeting needs of the city in terms of accessible housing. A clear standard across different local authority boundaries will also give certainty to building control inspectors in terms of what to expect when they're going out on site. The interim draft response is based on preferred policy option 4, but it also submits comments in regards to the other options based on the commentary set out within the report. It's worth noting as well that the Royal Town Planning Institute's response to the consultation agrees with what we've said in our interim draft response and indicates preference for policy option 4 as well as supporting policy option 2. So in conclusion, that the government is seeking to potentially increase the requirements for accessible housing in itself is a good thing, and we've responded accordingly by setting out what our preferred option would be in terms of securing the best outcomes for the people of Leeds. We've also set out some of the practical implications for introducing the requirements based on our experiences of preparing and implementing policy H10 so far. So Development Plan Panel is invited to consider and comment on the policy options and propose Leeds City Council consultation response as set out, and I'm happy to take comments from members. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Abby. Right, so again, it's another really strong piece of work. Comments, folks? I've got Councillor Ritchie, then Councillor Collins. Kevin?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I do agree with the approach that we're taking. Obviously, as you alluded to, we've had some discussions at chairs meetings about it and put some input in. I just do want to make a point though on 2.5. When we're celebrating the fact that we're one of the leading authorities in the use of accessible housing standards, that London has a 90% policy, doesn't it, on M42? And I know I've raised this with you directly, Abby, and you've responded accordingly around the reasons for that. I do think if it's good enough for London, it should be good enough for Leeds, and I hope that the government takes the highest target there and addresses those for the whole country. And the other point I want to make is on the problem with achieving that, which is on viability. This is always thrown back at us, isn't it? It's under 3.4.1, and the risk that we'd lose green space or affordable housing contributions. Again, I think there were actually consensus on this panel last time between the right in Councillor Carter and the left in Councillor myself and other colleagues, that this viability, this built-in guaranteed profit margin of circa 18 to 22% is just unreasonable and unsustainable. And the fact that we're hamstrung with these sort of initiatives is just unacceptable, really. And I think that's something that government needs to address appropriately. But with that, I do agree with the approach that we're taking and the consultation response that we've submitted. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. No, I agree that the margin and using it as an excuse to try to water down other commitments is unacceptable. Abby, do you have any response to Councillor Ritchie's points?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I totally accept what Councillor Ritchie said there. I mean, we've done in setting the requirements through policy H10. We've done what we had headroom for within the viability assessment of the plan. So based on the SHMA from 2017, that sort of requirement of 17.5% of dwellings to be M42 and a minimum of 5% to be M43. However, the percentage set within the core strategy were based on our viability and what flexibility we have. But it's noted that the 30% that we require for M42 is significantly over and above what was recommended through the SHMA. So any future mandated requirements by government will have to be factored into viability work that supports the local plan update. But we've always had that commitment, I'm sure we had that when we were preparing the policy in the first instance, that should we have flexibility or headroom in the future, we would try and capture an update and an increase in the percentage requirements as part of a local plan update.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Chair, could I supplement?
Yeah, of course.
Is that okay? Thank you. Just to take Councillor Ritchie's point on the general approach to viability, and just to sort of remind members that that was a part of our response to the planning white paper, where we did ask that the benefits that planning were trying to secure in terms of good design and other things weren't hamstrung by profit expectations.
Apologies for that. My phone was going. I was trying to make it sure it didn't make a noise. Thanks for that, Martin. That's really helpful. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I'm more than happy with the proposal that we adopt option 4. I like the fact that we're leading the way on this, and I think Leeds should always continue to do that. And I don't support that all developers should get over 20% profits. My question, though, is on that option 4, it said we will adopt a set percentage, or words to that effect, against M43. How are we going to set that set percentage? I'm just mindful that we don't really want to let the developers set it for us.
That's a good question. Abby?
So the expectation is that government will set that percentage. So it'll be a nationally set percentage for all local authorities. So it wouldn't be determined by the council, or would it be determined by the development industry either. What we've said in our response is that perhaps there should be a regional allowance to account for the differences in viability between places like London, which can support a much higher proportion of M43 than other market areas. But our expectation is that percentage will be set by government. Obviously, we want it to be set higher than what we've got the current percentage to be in policy H10. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a worthwhile exercise for us in doing this or supporting the policy option. But no, we expect that to be set by government.
Okay, can I just come back, Chair? Just so, if the government is slow in setting that percentage, what happens? Are we in limbo until they do that, or are we doing a piece of work that would actually put a figure in there for ourselves?
So we've got the current requirement for 2% M43 dwellings as is adopted in the policy H10, and then our understanding is that there's potential for us to increase those percentages, not as part of the ongoing local plan update, but as part of a future next tranche of local plan updates, should the viability appraisal allow us to do that, irrespective of whether the government comes out with any mandated nationally percentage requirement for M43 dwellings. So we've already got the requirement for 2%. We might be able to increase that in the future, subject to viability, irrespective of what the government says in terms of responding to the consultation process, because we don't necessarily know what government are going to come back with in terms of the response to this consultation process yet.
Right, thank you. That's lovely.
Excellent. Okay, Councillor Gruen, Caroline.
I just want to explore the option 4, option 3 thing. Why would we not do away altogether with M41 as you've suggested in option 3? Because I think that will be a loophole that developers will look to in order to prove to us that M42 is not achievable. And I really like the idea that we build to a high standard for every house.
Thanks, Councillor Gruen. That's a really important point that you've raised there. The reason why we've set out the response as we have is that M41 is a basic standard that applies to all new dwellings and guarantees that they're at least to a visitable standard, and then M42 is that sort of slightly higher standard. The justification for not removing M41 altogether is that it provides a basic guarantee of some accessibility, and then M42, if it becomes the new sort of national standard as a minimum, we've also got M41 to fall back on. If in the future M41 is gone altogether, and a developer comes in or an application comes in that says they can't meet M42, we haven't got anything then to fall back on in terms of a minimum standard, because M41 would be removed. So the M41 just gives us a little bit of comfort in terms of guaranteeing a basic level of accessibility, and that's the difference between option 3 and option 4.
Well, I think we'll have to be really, really careful not to find that we've got more M41s than is reasonable. I think that will be a sticking point, just to keep our eye on that.
Okay. Right, I see no more indications people want to speak.
Sorry, Chair.
Yep, no worries.
Just to go back to Councillor Guerin's point that this is a consultation paper and it's a response to a consultation paper. So everybody's frozen. I hope you can hear me. There we go. Clearly switching the microphone on has made my broadband go beyond its capacity. Can we just explore that a little bit further, the point that Councillor Guerin's just made? This is our response to a government consultation. So if we go in with a very clear expectation that M42 is our desired minimum standard, what difference does that make in terms of M41 if the government's pushed by everybody to go for M42 becoming the minimum?
Thanks, Councillor Mulherrin. So basically, it stops you having to negotiate on a site-by-site basis which parts of the M42 requirements you can and can't meet if you've got a fallback position of M41. The differences between M41 and M42 are actually not that significant in terms of what the adaptations are. So we've also then got M41 as a fallback position to guarantee a sort of basic level of accessibility, and that's what the difference is. So it stops you having to then, on an application by application basis, seek to understand which of bits of M42 they can achieve, which bits of M42 they can't achieve, and having to sort of have this hybrid approach, which is actually quite confusing in terms of building control and securing it on site. So there's a clear standard or a clear difference between M41, M42 and M43 helps for building control purposes and as well in terms of clarity. Does that help?
I still think it will level things down. That's just a personal view.
Okay.
I think, Chair, if I may, I mean, I think we'd be happy, given that this is a draft consultation response, I think we'd be happy to amend that response with the fears that members have expressed about the risk, and whether government can and should suggest any remedy to that, which might involve local authorities being very clear as to the exceptional circumstances that might exist when M41 is accepted, because it may be that there are some site ground conditions, for example, that don't lend themselves to the delivery of this, but yet it would still be desirable to put some accommodation on those sites. So we could certainly make this point to government.
Yeah, I think that would probably reassure members. I think it reassures myself. I'm seeing some nods from elected members around the screen. I think that's an appropriate way forward. Yeah, okay. I'm not seeing anyone indicating to speak, so I think we're happy to make progress with this item. Yeah. Good. Okay. That is, folks, our last substantive item, and we're finishing just about on time. Just remains for me to tell you that the next date of the development plan panel is Tuesday, the 19th of January at 1:30. If you can all be there, and it seems really early to be saying this, and it's always catches me out every year and sort of appears out of nowhere. But I say, have a good Christmas, have a happy New Year. I'm sure 2021 will be very different from 2020. You never know. But listen, folks, thank you very much for your attendance and your hard work today. Take care now. Stay safe.
Thank you.